Okay, so I guess we can get started. Hi everyone, and welcome to the Madinas BOF. Madinas standing for MAC Address Device Identification for Network and Application Services. So here is myself, Juan Carlos Zúñiga, to welcome you together with Carlos Bernardos.
Nice.
We're going to be welcoming you and helping you drive through this interesting discussion. As a reminder, this is the second BOF that we have. We didn't have one at the last IETF. We had a couple of meetings, but this time it's a slightly different BOF because it's going to be a WG forming BOF, and we're going to get into the details about it. So, Carlos, would you mind going for the list? Next slide. Yes, so first the etiquette. Make sure that you join the queue before participating. If you raise your hand or join the queue, we're going to make sure you get your spot and make your comments. Please mute your mic unless you are speaking so that we don't have as much interference, and ideally turn off your video if you are not speaking. You have some instructions on how to play with Miteco on the links that are on the screen. And note well, so as any other IETF meeting, please make sure that you are familiar with this. When you participate in IETF, you agree to follow the processes and policies. And please make sure that if ever there's any IETF contribution covered by patents or patent applications that you're aware of, you make that known to us or the group, either by sending us an email or raising your voice at the mic. The information that you provide at this IETF will be handled in accordance with the privacy statement. It's going to be public. Notes are being taken. The meeting is being recorded, and any of these material could be used in a litigation, in an IP litigation, if need be. So the reminders, as I mentioned, the minutes are taken. This minute is being recorded. Your presence is already being logged, our blue sheets, by logging into the data tracker. And you have a link there to the CodeMD. Also, you have it on top on the Miteco with the pencil and square icon. So please help us take notes so that we can record good minutes. And again, as a reminder, these minutes are going to be public. So next slide. Our agenda is quite loaded, but very interesting, as you will see. First, we're going to go through a quick recap of the meeting, the intro, the scope, and so on. So Carlos and I are going to take care of that. Eric is going to be helping us here as a supporting AD. Then we are going to move into background and clarification. Background and clarification Q&As. For the background, we're going to have 3 presentations. The background and status of MAC address randomization work at IETF, at the IEEE 802, and at the WBA. The idea to make the meeting run smoothly is going to be to first go through the 3 presentations, and then we're going to take Q&A at the end of the 3 presentations for the 3 presentations. So that way we can address all your concerns and questions on the background in one shot and in that one slot. After that, we're going to move to the use cases and problem statements, where Jérôme is going to be presenting us with the randomized and changing MAC addresses use cases, which is his draft, providing a problem statement as a baseline for the discussion here. And then we're going to devote quite a bit of time to the charter discussion. There was a charter already published in the list, and we are going to go through it. Carlos and I are going to be running that with the support from our ADs, and we're going to leave a few minutes at the end for the next steps and all the usual questions that we get for and above. Are there any questions regarding this agenda? Any bashing? Hearing none, okay, we can move to the next slide, please. So the scope and purpose of this BOF is to, first of all, inform the IETF community about the latest MAC address randomization activities and purposes. There are several activities going on, not only inside IETF, but also in other SDOs, such as IEEE 802, notably, and WBA. All these are addressing the latest status on MAC address randomization, how to do it, and what it implies and what it affects. So that's the main purpose of this group, is to basically make a snapshot of what's going on and to see what is achieving, but also what services are being affected, and if there is something that we need to do about it. So for that, we're going to talk about the present network and application service related issues that are seen due to this MAC address randomization. And as a reminder, MAC address randomization is a feature that allows to provide user privacy. So then we're going to identify if there are any actions required at the IETF. In this case, by actions, we mean coordination with other SDOs, documenting use cases that people are experiencing, and identification of existing solutions or gaps. For that, the purpose is going to be, or the proposal is to form a working group that is going to take care of these three. But as you notice, there are no solutions foreseen or new solutions foreseen at the moment. So there's no protocol work foreseen for the short term. The idea, and we will get into the details at the charter discussion, but the idea is to make a short-lived working group that can take care of these three items: the coordination, the documentation, and the identification of the gaps. And then we can decide if we need to recharter the group or just declare it closed. We'll see that during the charter discussion. I don't know if there is any other point that Carlos, Eric, would you like to say something at this moment?
No, from my side. Thanks.
Okay. Eric?
And nothing on my side now. The really important stuff is to check at the end of this BOF whether there is interest in working in this area, whether we can achieve work, and whether there are people ready to work on this topic. That's basically the questions to be answered at the end. That's what I expect from this BOF at the end.
Okay, thank you. And yes, we're going to make sure we address all those points. So we will run a few questions at the end to make sure that we get answers to these questions. All right. So if there's no other point, maybe we can move on, Carlos. So our first presentation then in the agenda, it's going to be the MAC address randomization related work at the IETF. And we would have Amelia presenting.
Hello.
Hi, Amelia. Anytime you need to move, let me know. Okay.
No, you can move ahead to the slide. Right. So the IETF has already dealt with MAC randomization in a number of processes. Namely, IPv6 address generation used to be MAC dependent. So it was generated from the MAC address of a device. But so there are several solutions that have been discussed over the years for a long period of time, going back to 2004 or something, that allow for IPv6 address generation independently of the MAC. There's also been discussions on MAC randomization in terms of networking for automobiles, like in IP-Wave. It comes up in all of the groups, all of the working groups where you have privacy concerns from before. But not only MAC randomization is a relevant concern for the IETF, or has been over the years. There's also a number of other privacy initiatives currently ongoing in the IETF that deal with non-MAC and non-IP related identifiers, like PRG, QNAME minimization for DNS, there's anonymity profiles in RFC, 7844, and so forth. You can find a number of identifier-related RFC reviews and also further work in the data tracker document tracing for RFC 6973 privacy considerations for protocol design. If you're interested in delving deeper into IETF privacy work, including MAC randomization, but not solely MAC randomization. A number of RFC reviews have led to privacy-oriented changes, and so we see that in many places actually in the IETF now. If you want to know more about specifically the IPv6 address generation and the various initiatives that are related to this, or the anonymity profiles, you can see draft Sunyiga MAC address randomization, which is available in version 1 at Data Tracker, and it contains an entire chapter about the, clause, I should say, about the MAC randomization efforts at the IETF. So I think that concludes my presentation. Short review. Are there any questions?
We're going to be taking questions for this whole section after the 3 presentations, if you don't mind.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's fine. Then I withdraw into the mutedness.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Amelia. So next is the MAC address randomization work at IEEE 802, and we'll have Jerome presenting.
Thank you, and I'll get out of mutedness then. Next slide, please. So thank you very much. My name is Jerome Henry. I've been working at the IEEE for a long time. So I would like to share with you what's happening over there in terms of MAC randomization and privacy. There are 2 groups I would like to make you aware of. One, which is in the umbrella of 802 in general, and another one which is branched into 2 subgroups in the 802.11 working group. So in the general framework, after the work that Amelia mentioned at the IETF in the years 2013 and 15, the IEEE community also in the 802 working groups started looking at the issue of randomized MAC addresses and privacy. That led to the formation of a first group, which is called the 802E group, which decided to, under the umbrella of the 802.1, which is the architecture group in the 802 community. So there's a security group there under the umbrella of that group to create what they call a recommended practice for privacy consideration in IEEE 802 technologies. So this is a document, you have a link on the page here, which essentially lists a certain number of considerations about privacy in 802 technologies. The issue of randomizing and changing MAC addresses, especially on the client side, is not directly addressed there, but it's highly prevalent because that's one of the first things that we noticed in the communications that had a bearing on privacy. So although this document doesn't make any special provision about RCM, it does recognize that there is a direct association between the MAC address and a device, and if this device is a personal device, then immediately you have an association between a MAC address and a user. And to respect privacy, there are a certain number of suggestions that this recommended practice does, including one which is to use temporary identifiers every time which is possible. So that doesn't mean necessarily MAC address, but MAC address is definitely in many cases an identifier. And also when you use a temporary identifier, the suggestion is also to make sure that the identifier doesn't remain beyond the need of the communication or the establishment of the communication. So somehow, the RCM itself is not described, but the privacy recommended practice recognizes that RCM is here and likely to stay because it allows, the implementation of these recommendations. That group concluded its work back in 2019, and the spec was published in 2020, and you have the link here if you want to have a deeper look at it. Next slide, please. in between, specifically in the 802.11 working group, which is something very sensitive, a group very sensitive to those issues, because as you know, Wi-Fi communications happen over radio technologies, which means that anybody in range of the signal can read that signal. And of course, some of the signal content will be encrypted, but some of the signal content will just be overhead headers that are used to establish communication between a mobile station and an access point, for example. And among those elements which are not encrypted, the source, the sender, and the receiver are visible. So that includes the MAC addresses. So in 2019, a group was formed, which is initially a topic interest group, as they call it over there, that then became a study group, SG, to look into this problem of randomized and changing MAC addresses, observing that many vendors were already implementing such scheme, and wondering if that had any consequence for the 802.11 communications, with the strong idea that probably it did. The conclusion of that group in 2020 led to the formation of two subgroups, which are the ones I would like to share with you about. One is based on the conclusion that randomized and changing MAC addresses are obviously going to be here for a while, because those wireless communications being unprotected as far as the MAC address is concerned in the source or destination fields in the header, handheld vendors are likely to continue implementing randomized and changing MAC address schemes for their handheld devices. And the first question that this group was asking itself was, what does that do to 802.11 communications? And it's clear that when many of the 802.11 specification was designed back in the year 2000, there was an implicit assumption that one station meant one MAC address. And as soon as you decouple the station from the MAC address, strange things may happen, or maybe not, but we were not sure. And because the spec is fairly long, it's about 4,000 pages, there was a first group that was created, 802.11bh, which name, as you see on the screen, is Enhanced Services with Randomized MAC Address, was to go through a series of use cases, services that the group thought were necessary to the implementation or the good implementation of the good operations of 802.11, and that might be affected by 802.11, by randomized and changing MAC addresses. So what the group is ongoing right now is examination of these services that are 802.11 services, and look into use cases where RCM may have an impact into the efficiency of these services. And every time it's possible, suggest solutions to alleviate those issues. So the goal is not, to recommend not doing RCM, right? The idea that RCM is here. So the goal is not to diminish privacy or negate the RCM process, but just observing that it's there, try to assess if there are some modifications of 802.11 that could be done within the next year or two to make sure that the operations of 802.11 would continue smoothly, even in the presence of 802.11. So as you see at the bottom, the group is expected to have its work done within 2 years, which is fairly short for the 802.11 world. Next slide, please. And then at the same time, the same group recognized that because the 802.11 communication happens over wireless communications, and because an observer can see some of that traffic, and although some of the traffic payload may be encrypted, there is probably a bearing in 802.11 about privacy that needs to be examined. So a second group was formed, which is 802.11bi, which is also the result of this TIG and SG work that now looks more precisely into how can we modify 802.11 to enhance privacy while still maintaining services. So the goal here is to look into 802.11 and say, can we make it work and improve privacy at the same time? So the goal here is to look into what 802.11 communications entail and look at if there are some elements here that could be augmented, improved to increase the privacy when we're looking at personal devices. So there is some overlap somehow in the scope between these two groups, but they are very distinct in the 802.11 mind. 11bh is looking at RTM is here. Does it break anything in 802.11, and can we fix these things so that 802.11 continues working even when RCM is in place? Whereas 802.11bi is saying, well, we know 802.11 communications happen over the air. Therefore, are there some risk for privacy that could be addressed in ATOTO 11 communications. So of course, RCM plays into privacy and vice versa, but the scope of the groups are very different. And in fact, as you see at the bottom of the screen, the A11BI group's scope is much wider, and it's expected to work for a longer time, and is expected to publish at the end of 2025. Next slide, please. If you're interested in looking into those groups and their documents, please be aware that the ATOTO 11 policies that all the documents, contributions to the groups are publicly accessible. The draft of the documents are not accessible to everyone, but every contribution that is made to any group is publicly accessible. So we have on these slides a few pointers for you to look at the timelines as they're being revised, and the documents if you want to look at what's going on. And of course, I would like to point again to the Zuniga MAC address randomization draft, because in this draft you will also see what are the current RCM schemes which are implemented by handheld vendors, that make ATOTO 11 devices that are personal devices. I'll pause there and go back to muteness as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jerome. So, as we said, we're going to be taking questions for Amelia, Jerome, and Tim at the end. But next, we're going to hear the presentation from Team 12 about MAC address randomization related work at the WBA. Tim?
Can you hear me?
Very low.
I seem not to have audio.
We hear you very, very low in volume.
Okay, thank you.
Sounds
I think that,
good.
oh, I think I must have the wrong microphone. Sorry about that. It's okay. So, can we have the slides, please? Okay, skip that one. Thank you. Move on to the next. Super. Okay, so at the WBA, we don't tend to address things in quite such a technical way. We're more looking at the technologies as being of use to our members. We've been watching MAC randomization for a couple of years, and it's become apparent that now devices are starting to use it, and it's starting to become a problem. So we've set up a project to look at the whole issue of device identities to be used in place of randomized MAC addresses for authentication to sessions and general management of Wi-Fi sessions. So the aim of this is to.
Sorry, Tim. Would it be possible to you to speak even louder or closer to the mic? It is very, very faint. We can hear you, but very, very faint.
Let me just see if I can swap mic. Just be a second.
Juan Carlos, is there any chance that we can swap Tim's session with another one?
We have time for the three presentations next in the agenda. So
okay, let's wait until Tim fixes his mic issue then.
Yeah, we have we are doing well with the agenda time. So I see there's about a settings icon on the top right to change devices. I don't know if this could help.
I should be
Tim.
using the mic, but
The one with the screwdriver and the wrench,
yes,
right? Top right.
It should be. Okay. Okay, thank you. Is that better?
Much better.
Okay, it appears
Yes.
that the web session is overriding the laptop settings.
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. Right.
So you can recap quickly and then catch up if you don't mind.
Sure. Yes. So just quickly, we've been watching MAC address randomization for a couple of years, and it's starting to become an issue for various sectors of our members. And so we've set up a project to examine the issues and to look at what alternatives there are available to use for session management and authentication and such like. So the project has been set up. Its aim is to find alternative means so that MAC addresses don't get used beyond their legitimate per session use. And amongst the things that we intend to do is to liaise with all the other standards bodies who are working on these issues, because we don't tend to actually produce standards ourselves, but to look at how they work, look at the end-to-end journey for the users, and make recommendations. So we're going to analyze the available solutions, find gaps and such like, and document the problems, and then recommend technologies. So just go into a little more detail on that. If I could have the next slide, please. So what we've done so far, we've started off looking at the problem statement, investigating where MAC addresses are used and for what purposes, and what issues this causes. And we've done that already, and we have supplied a document to the IETF and the WFA with some of the results of those studies. Going on from there, we've looked at those issues that have been raised to identify what the actual identification requirements are, whether they are for devices, as MAC addresses normally do, or whether they are for users. It's been a presumption that the device is the thing that we identify, because that's what was available. But in many cases, what the service really wants to identify is the user, and sometimes the user and specific devices. So we've done that phase, and we're currently examining the existing solutions that are out there, or solutions that do not rely on a permanent MAC address, and how they can be used for networks and the management and operation of networks. So these are things like 802.1x, Passpoint, open roaming. For other cases, maybe DPP. And there are other less standardized things like identifying the user through an app they put on their mobile device. So we're currently looking at all those and seeing what they can provide in terms of identification and what they can't provide, and how much they've been standardized. So next slide, please. So that's where we've currently got to, and we're just starting work on seeing how these various standard technologies work and how they fit the requirements of various sectors. So the hospitality industry, for instance, has quite different requirements from an in-home system. So we'll be trying to recommend for each market sector which of those solutions is the more appropriate and what it involves to deploy such a solution. And whilst we're doing that, we expect to find that there will be requirements from the network providers, the network operators, that will not be met. And we hope to identify those at the same time. And at that point, certainly we would want to be coming back to standard bodies like the IETF with those issues and discussing them and seeing if there's anything that can be done to resolve them. And finally, at the end of all that, we will be writing it all up in white papers and recommendations. And whilst those are normally only available to members, in some cases they are made public, and usually there's a public summary that is available as a result. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim. So this is the end of the first three presentations, and then we're going to move on to questions. There are multiple discussions already going on the chat, but I'm not sure the presenters are following necessarily. So I would invite you to come up to the mic and ask if you have any questions to either Amelia on the work on IETF, Jerome on the work in IEEE 802, or Tim on the work on Wireless Broadband Alliance. Roman.
Presentations, they at least brought me up to speed. I heard in the beginning one of the focuses of the BOF of the future working group would be around liaisoning with different kind of groups. Could any of the previous kind of speakers who are representing the IEEE work or the Wireless Broadband Alliance talk about what that liaisoning, what's the substance of that liaisoning with the IETF?
Okay, well, I'll give that a go from my side. Already we have presented the analysis of, sorry, just a second. The analysis of the uses of MAC as identifiers and the problems they pose. This is the typical kind of liaison we would do. But, you know, if you have similar problem statements or issues, then we would be quite happy to receive those and read those, and between us discuss the issues. And I think for us it's about clarifying the problems that are caused by MAC randomization and how the operators of the networks can resolve those.
If I may add here, I think that there's also probably you know, Roman, that there's also an IAB IEEE coordination group that it's been going on for a while. So over there we make sure that whatever new work related from one organization to the other is being addressed, commented, and if ever communicated, you know, to the group, so that we can coordinate and of course avoid any overlap in the work. So that would be clearly also something that Madinas could interface with IEEE 802, and maybe Jerome can provide more information. But I think at this point it'll be important, especially because there's ongoing work in IEEE 802 right now, to make sure that that is taken into account before any suggestions, BCPs, or anything else is suggested at the IETF side.
Yeah, thank you. And if I may add on that line, although we know we work with an OSI model, we understand that IEEE works at layer 2, IETF works with upper layers. It feels that it's important to communicate on challenges which we see on each side, because there are clearly dependencies on each other. So it's useful to avoid overlap and to avoid gaps where one STO might think that the other is likely to take care of something, and vice versa. So making sure that we communicate extensively, I think, is very important. And I must say, I'm vice chair of 808 NBI. but I speak here as an active participant. This is not an official IEEE statement, but those liaisons will help smoothen this communication between this group and streamline the joint efforts, I think.
Thanks, Jerome. So, are there any other questions for either of the three presenters? I saw some discussion regarding SAE password ID. I don't know if people would like to ask the question now, or do you prefer to bring it to the list? Tim Capali, would you like to say something?
I guess I'll just add some color to what I said in the chat. I mean, I think SAE password ID is often left out of these discussions because no vendor has implemented it. Just because a vendor hasn't implemented it doesn't mean it's not a solution to the problem. I think that's why we ended up in a lot of these messes to where we are today, right? If there's an easy way to do something, people will take that road, and it doesn't push adoption of more secure ways to do things. And so, like, between Passpoint and SAE password ID, we have a solution, and DPP, we have a solution for everything, right? And to continue to try and keep anything about MAC-based identification alive, we'll just continue this problem, right? So I guess I still struggle at what this group is eventually trying to solve.
So this group is, just to answer that one last point, is trying to solve those questions. So if ever there are solutions existing, that would be clearly in the scope of this group to highlight them and mention that these are the solutions to be taken. But for that, we need to, for sure, first do the problem statement and gap analysis to make sure that first we agree that there's a problem across all the different SDOs. That we analyze these solutions, the ones you mentioned, and maybe some others, why not? And then we can decide if there are gaps or not. If there are no gaps, then perfect. We just mention it clearly in a document and say there is a solution. It's just that it's not being implemented, but there is a solution and we strongly suggest you to implement it. Or there are solutions for X number of use cases, but there's still one remaining, which may require some extra work. And at that point, the question will be open, what would be that work and who should do it? Okay, so in fact, probably that's a good transition to the next part, which is the use cases and problem statement. And then for that, we have started already with a draft written by Jerome. So Jerome is going to give us an update on about his draft.
Thank you very much. And SAE, if anybody's interested, is extensively discussed 11BI. So its solutions and its challenges are very much discussed there. So this draft goes, of course, beyond to the 11 statements, and what we try to do is to look at the RCM problem statement a little bit more in detail, and also look at perform some minimal gap analysis about what the current requirements are about. Next slide, please. Next slide. So in that context, we wanted to have a document that would analyze the use cases that RCM brings in terms of affecting network services and affecting user experience, and also list requirements associated to RCM that we could use as a foundation for us to continue working on that analysis of what is there and what may not be there. So we have, of course, a link to the draft here if you want to have a look, and of course the feedback is always welcome. Next slide, please. In that context, if I go through the document briefly, what we're doing is that we are trying to organize a little bit our thoughts around RCM by trying to triage the contributing elements around the discussion around RCM. The first is, user versus device. As Tim shared, in WBA, many times the case is about identifying the user, not identifying the devices. So distinguishing cases where we talk about the device and where we talk about the user is one thing we do. Also, there are multiple types of devices, shared service devices, like barcode scanner that you have in a warehouse, which doesn't contain any personal information, and personal devices. So organizing a thought about the issues around those different types of elements is also something we try to do. And of course, RCM is to protect privacy against people eavesdropping or them, and we try to list who are these them that may invade on privacy. And there are multiple actors that we try to list that may have a say or an action into the communication structure of any device implementing RCM. So there are some functional network entities, the access point, wireless switches, all these things, and there are also some human related entities, people managing your Wi-Fi if you are in a shared home structure, for example. And also observers, that may be there for multiple reasons, to troubleshoot things or to spy on you. And they may be over the air, they may be over the wire, they may be inside the network, they may be outside the network on the internet. So we try, to organize those different elements and at least name them so that we could refer to them as we look into what solutions are there, what problems are there, and what requirements are there. Next slide, please. In that same logic, we also try to look into what is RCM trying achieving? What is the trust variable that comes into this privacy protection? And we find, of course, that there are many different scenarios. There are scenarios where users have full trust into some of these entities, or all of them maybe. Some scenarios where users have trust in some of these entities, but not some others. And some scenarios where there is absolutely no trust, and there is a strong will to obfuscate the user identity or decouple it from the device, from all the users, all the actors. And that brings us, of course, to the notion of environment. And we find, of course, different types of environments that we want to list in this draft, where we say, the home environment is probably very different from a public venue, a hotspot in an airport, in terms of who is there, who is doing what, and who's watching what. Same if you have an enterprise where you have an MDM, managed device provided by the enterprise. The requirements there are probably very different from, again, an airport or some place like that. So we try to list those elements together. And also, as far as RCM is concerned, we try to list the elements that are using the MAC address today for multiple reasons, practical reasons being most of them. From the AP who needs to know who is connected and respond to whom. The services like DHCP.1, etc., routers, all these things that use today the MAC address to try to identify stations. And then we try to go into the assumptions into RCM, and that's the next slide, which brings us to the requirements that we conclude about, to say when we're looking at RCM. Next slide, please. There are a few things that we need to make sure. The first one is that although we have all these elements which are going to help us guide our reflection, the network should not make any assumption that you're going to say, don't randomize your MAC. And that's something we've seen a lot in literature over the last year or so, where the simple solution was like, don't randomize the MAC. You have nothing to hide, that kind of thing. So we said, well, that cannot hold. It doesn't happen. Also, we assume that because RCM happens, RCM should be expected to happen because it's likely to continue to be that way, even when services are used. And of course, if a service is used and the MAC changes and that service uses the MAC address, well, that may cause some service interruption. And there may need to be something there to address what happens there. Maybe the service breaks and that's okay. Maybe there is a recovery mechanism that exists, maybe, or maybe not. That's something probably interesting to look into, to evaluate what happens in that case. And of course, the MAC address is not necessarily the identity, so we also try to make this distinction in the requirements to avoid confusion. Next slide, please. Which brings us, to thank you, to the conclusion of the draft, where we say, well, based on all these elements that could be used as a vocabulary convention between people interested in that matter. We can start looking at the different use cases and try to look at the different standards where MAC address is used and where RCM may have an impact, and try to organize our work by thinking these different environments and see if there are different challenges, these different trust level, etc. Maybe doing so will allow us to evaluate different impact, evaluate that there are maybe some already mechanisms in those standards or protocols that allow us to function very well without RCM. And as Jesse was saying, maybe it's just about putting up some BCP or a best practice document to say, well, there is a solution, just do this, and it solves your problem for this and that service in this and that environment. Maybe there are some secure mechanisms that can be used with RCM, and maybe there are some mechanisms that may make RCM less disruptive for services for which we do not want or we think that disruption may be damaging for the user experience or the service efficiency. So all these, may be something we can evaluate by looking at these different scenarios, different use cases, organizing these different vocabularies, etc. So that's where this draft is right now. Next slide, please. We have a few versions of this document. The last version is from May. We've presented this document a few times, last time in the previous BOF and in a few meetings as well. So we think we start having a good series of input about these different scenarios that we try to assess and organize our thoughts against. But of course, as usual, we welcome very much any additional feedback and additional input to try to structure, this document in the way that can be useful, to people working in the field of RCM and trying to, have a statement a bit more granular that's saying, you should never hide your MAC address because you have nothing to hide, which is, a bit too generic. Or you should hide your MAC address from everybody always because they are bad and they want to get you, which also a bit too generic. So we hope that trying to organize a little bit around those different structure will help better assess, the problem statement behind RCM and also better assess, what gaps or technical solution there may be around in the existing standards. Let me pause there as I have a few minutes left to see if there are any questions on this draft.
Thanks, Jerome. So are there any questions for Jerome? No questions. Okay.
So thank you, which may be a sign that, either everybody has read the draft multiple times and you're tired of hearing me talking about it, or it's the first time you read about it. In both cases, please read it again if you have a chance. And, as usual, every feedback is very welcome.
Perfect, thanks. So we do have a hand from Amelia. I don't know, Amelia, would you like to say something?
Yes, I would. So I have a question relating to requirement 8. Which is relating to association or post-association. So identify a secure mechanism for the device to notify the network prior to updating the MAC address. Does this concern pre-association or post-association notifications?
So maybe what I should do is read it again. So in that section, thank you, Amelia, thank you very much. In that section 3.6, there is a requirement formulation as we were looking at in the last slide. So we'll list 8 requirements that we have assembled so far that we think the RCM brings, and our requirement number 8, let me read it again, is identify a secure mechanism for the device to notify the network prior to updating the MAC address. So what this is of course, it follows the previous requirements where we're saying if there is a service which is ongoing provided to that station and that device suddenly changes its MAC address, that may be disrupting the service. So in that case, it may be useful if the device, in the interruption of service disrupts the network operation and or the user experience on the device. So if there's such disruption, what this requirement number 8 says, oh, maybe we should look into whether there is already an existing mechanism that would allow the mobile device to say, hey, I'm going to change my MAC for the others, but to you, I'm going to tell you this is still me. So we're looking at whether this type of possibility exists there. So we're not necessarily looking at 802.11 in particular. So therefore, association or not association is not the target here. Is to say if we don't want to have a poor user experience and the MAC address rotation may be disrupting the service, are there in those standards we'll be looking into some existing mechanism that would alleviate the disruption by providing this information in advance, so that that particular service will not be interrupted from the user standpoint.
Okay, well, thank you for the clarification.
Very welcome. Thank you for raising this.
All right. So thank you very much for that presentation, Jerome, and the clarifications. So the next point in the agenda is the charter discussion. And we have posted the latest version on the list, and it's also something you can find in the materials. Well, basically here on this slide set. So Carlos, would you mind going to the next slide? The charter. The idea here is to discuss the charter, and for that we are going to split it into different sections, starting from the intro, the scope, and then going into the actual plan for the working group, so that it's easier for everyone. But if you want to go back, please take a look at the slides, and then you are going to be able to read the specific parts of the charter. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Then the first part, the introductory, I think it's pretty straightforward. It's just stating what MAC address randomization is, and for that we define that in this case by MAC we mean the link layer address using IEEE 802 technologies. That was originally something assigned, as you may know, historically by the IEEE Registration Authority Committee, RAC, for globally unique MAC addresses, of course, starting from Ethernet. That's the source and the birth of the use of MAC address, but that evolved over time into other use cases, notably wireless, and then 802.11 made it so popular that now we have almost every one of us a few MAC addresses on our bodies. And since then, of course, the paradigm changed, because from being an address that was linked to just a network card, well, now we had it, or a network interface, we had it on top of us, and could be used as a tracker, on-wheeling tracker for individuals. For that reason, then the idea of changing this identifier started popping up, as we heard from 2013, 14, 15, the work that we started doing in IEEE and IETF. And therefore, the paradigm has started shifting. MAC addresses now are being randomized, and we in the draft that Amelia presented, we show how some operating systems are actively randomizing MAC addresses nowadays, which is a good thing for privacy, but not such a good thing for certain services that were relying on the long-lasting nature of these identifiers. So for that reason, in knowing that MAC addresses will be randomized or changing in the future, we need to see how these affects network services. So could you go to the next slide, please, Carlos? So in this case, as I said, the idea of this working group would be to examine the effect of this randomized and changing MAC addresses on network and application services in scenarios that are relevant. So, for instance, specifically where identity of the device or the user is required, where it is not required, and in case where the personal device identity stability is desirable, we ideally are going to recommend protocols or solutions that can be used to protect the exchange of these identifiers without compromising the privacy, of course, of the user. For that, we ideally are going to look at not only work at the IETF, but also elsewhere that could be applicable. So the scope is not to only list or mention work at the IETF, but also potentially work that has been done elsewhere that could address these issues. Next slide, please. Regarding the time frame and inter-SDO coordination, and we had a question about that. The idea is to work together with relevant working groups first inside IETF, such as BHC and Interia, and also liaise with other SDOs, such as IEEE 802 and the Wireless Broadband Alliance, WBA, and coordinate on these recommendations and potential follow-up activities within or outside the IETF. For that, we expect the working group to be a short time frame. We don't think that this would take too long, so we are foreseeing some 12, 18 months to quickly assess these needs and publish a couple of solutions-based documents if ever recharting process is identified as necessary. So just to clarify here, and we will see that in the deliverables, the idea is not to get into solution in the sense of producing protocol work, but rather just work on problem statements and gap analysis at this moment. So if we can move to the next slide. The deliverables then proposed would be that informational problem statement document, including use cases and analysis and requirements. The informational MAC address randomization analysis document, for which we both we have a baseline already, and potentially a best common practices document if we can find solutions that are relevant to the problem statement defined before. So with that, we move on to discussion on the charter. Does anybody have any questions? Or yes, Roman.
Attack the deliverables based on what was previously stated. So what we're teeing up is that the macro problem statement is that previously different things relied on static MAC addresses, and now they're kind of changing, and so we need a mechanism to kind of deal with that. So we know that macro problem statement. We don't need more investigation of that. The challenge is that on a per protocol basis, we need to explore what that means, and that's the intent of the informational document that's talking about the use cases and the analysis? Question mark?
Yes. So the idea is to see what is happening. What are the problems that are being faced on different arenas with respect to randomizing the MAC address. For that, we are going to analyze different use cases. And for instance, we have talked about home use case, roaming use case, or hotel use case, enterprise use case, and so on, which are very different scenarios that require different analysis of the identifiers, the users, and so on. And then from that, the idea is to derive the requirements to both preserve the privacy and also continue delivering the services, the expected services from the user. So from that point of view, yeah, the problem statement ideally would include all those, and as well as potential solutions that can be used to address the issues that may be experienced these days. Does that answer your question?
and maybe I'm misunderstanding, then what are the other two documents? What's the BCP and what's the analysis document about then? So
the analysis document, before Madinas, we started doing a snapshot because the MAC address randomization topic keeps coming back every year or so after the work started in 2015 or so, and the question is always like, is this being addressed? Are operating systems implementing it? What is it breaking? Is it breaking everything? No, it's actually working, and so on. So we wanted to just provide an informational snapshot of what happens today in the different fora and everything regarding MAC address randomization, so that we know at least what's going on. And that document, for that we have a baseline, is Draft Zuniga, the one that Amelia presented an update, but it includes not only IETF, also it includes the work in IEEE and elsewhere. So even some information about what is being implemented in certain operating systems, for instance. So again, 100% informational and just providing facts. What is happening today? What is going on? What is the status? So from that point of view, it complements the former in the sense that the former will say, okay, MAC addresses are changing, but it may get into, and I'm hypothetically speaking here, some use cases are experiencing something that other use cases are not experiencing, and then is that going to continue? Is that going to evolve? Is the problem going to get worse? Is the problem going to get fixed? That we don't know. We don't have an answer, and that I guess is something that the first document, the problem statement, could get into beyond what is today. Then for the third one, the best common practices, is indeed, as we heard already, there are a couple of solutions that are not being implemented. So we need to make a detailed analysis. Is this an actual solution addressing multiple of the issues that we are talking about? Then let's highlight it and recommend it strongly, because it may be there, but no one is using it, or one SEO is not aware of it because it's been developed by another SEO, for instance. I don't know. That ideally would be the work of this working group, and that would be reflected in the first deliverable, the problem statement and gap analysis document. I hope this helps clarify. Any other questions? Eric?
Roman question. I think the name of problem statement is maybe a misnomer. It's more like a current situation, what's happening right now. And you have a draft, DC, if not mistaken, that says, yeah, on this operating systems, on this device, that's changing, as far as I know, every time you associate to a new access point for this and this reason. So not only IEEE defines some protocols, but we need to say as well whether they're implemented, and getting a status of IEEE, BI, and BH could be interesting as well. So maybe in the charter, we need to change the informational problem statement into something else than problem statement here.
So yeah, if that helps clarification, for sure, we have two documents right now. One that is providing the snapshot of what is the status of specifications and situations in different SDOs and as well as operating systems. We have that one document, and then we are proposing to work on another document that will highlight the issues that are being faced in different use cases. So yeah, whatever makes those two documents clearer from the content point of view, and changing the title should not be an issue, but that's something definitely we can do if that helps. Dave?
Yeah, so same point. I find the description of the first two things there to be confusing, if not overlapping. One approach would be to rename both of them to say, one of them is use cases and the second one is actually a problem statement. Another approach would be to combine those in the milestones, because what working groups are allowed to do, should this become a working group, is that you could have multiple documents that address the same milestone. It says, okay, well, the working group decided to take this milestone and split it into two documents, and not bake it into the charter that these have to be two different documents, right? So you could combine those two and say they're both aspects of the problem statement, and only put one in a charter. That we've done in a couple other working groups. So.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that input, Bob.
Hi. Yeah, I mean, whether the first two were one or two documents or so forth, I think that's all fine. I think it's good to describe the issues people are encountering and how they're done. But I'm still a little confused about what happens after that. Is there going to be something developed that's an alternative to the way people use fixed MAC addresses, or recommendations to not use random MAC addresses, or I'm not exactly sure what the step is beyond sort of providing information on the problem.
So for that, I think your question, and I would maybe defer to Jerome to complement, but I think that is what is being discussed in IEEE 802 BH and BI. So it was already addressed by 802E in the sense that they were highlighting privacy issues, but BH and BI are specifically talking about what to do with the MAC address, because that's their real. What we want to do here is assuming that MAC addresses are changing now, and it's no longer a long-lasting identifier that we can rely upon to provide network services. What do we do in case services are broken? So it's more along those lines, like what happens with the services, the network services that were provided, either connectivity or otherwise, that were provided. Some of them relying on a MAC address associated to one.
Sure.
One user.
Yeah, I mean, I understand the problem. I'm just trying to understand what the working group is going to do as a next step. I mean, is it just going to point to an IEEE document, or?
Probably an IEEE document or a WBA document saying this problem can be solved if you implement this specification, in which case we would be done by that time. But if ever we find out that there's one use case that is not being addressed by existing solutions, or the existing solutions are not sufficient, then we are going to ask the question, do we need to do something else? And if so, is that something that we would need to do in the IETF? At that point, we would recharter. So because at this moment, we don't want this working group to work on solutions.
Okay, I think that was the answer to my question. Thank you.
Thanks. You? I see your camera on. I guess you want to say something?
Just want to. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to add on like what we're expecting from the working group perspective. So with all the use cases we laid out, I think Jerome did a good job and show like all the scenarios here. We're expecting We know that like we're living in a world that MAC address randomization is going to happen. We just looking for some guidance or like or any like guidelines. When we try to implement the service here, we can like community, because it's the MAC is in the link layer. It will impact higher than just the link layer. There's applications that today they still rely on the MAC addresses. So I think that this is more like try to get the community together. This is a real problem, and then we just try to use this as a platform to try to solve this problem cohesively. So then, rather than like everybody try to invent their own solutions, then then we'll be living in a really fragmented world.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that clarification. I haven't been able to follow up all the details on the chat, but if there are any other questions, we still have a couple of minutes before moving on to the polls. So far we have got some good feedback on how to clean the charter, specifically about the deliverables. So I'm assuming that's something we can address on the mailing list. And by the way, we do have a mailing list, Madinas, in the IETF. So please make sure you join if you are interested in this topic. Ideally, we would like to clean that text openly and then before proposing it. Eric?
Looks like all the discussion has been around the deliverable. I just wonder whether the participants in this BOF want also to discuss the charter. I mean, the first paragraph, the second paragraph, the third paragraph, and the fourth paragraph, not only about the deliverables. So I would love to get some more questions or interaction on the previous paragraph. Maybe the first one is pretty obvious, right? So we can skip it, but the others maybe not.
Yeah, thanks, Carlos. So again, the scope is to examine the effects of RCM on network and application services and recommend protocols or solutions, as well as best practices to ensure both that privacy is achieved, but also that the service quality is preserved. So that would be the scope of the group. And this next slide, the other intention of the group is to do the inter-SEO coordination and also to be a short time frame group. So having Madinas as the focal point for interacting with these different SEOs helps, because if we split it across multiple working groups inside IETF, it could be cumbersome, even though we have the IEEE 802 coordination, and we also have discussions with WBA. Having a central focal point in the IETF would be useful to concentrate these discussions, liaisons, and so on. So I guess those would be the two other pieces of important content in the draft, besides the deliverables. Roman?
Text and threading it across the deliverables. Could you just help me make a couple of things concrete, because I'm struggling just a little bit. We have MAC address randomization widely deployed in a lot of modern operating systems, and we're talking about making sure we specify the requirements for services. Could you help me understand who's the consumer of those requirements, and maybe a few examples of what services we're talking about? Because I guess naively I have in my head is the future is here. So things are clearly breaking if it's kind of a problem. So we talking next gen tech? Help me contextualize it, please. Thanks.
Sure. So I guess maybe I would defer to the BOF proponents view or someone else. When we had the first BOF, you drove us through several use cases where some of the services you were used to providing were breaking now that these MAC addresses were being randomized.
I think I'm happy to start, and then definitely welcome other inputs from the participants. So the way that today, yes, some of the new Android OS and Apple OS start doing the randomization. But the way that they do it is as of today, the implementation is always driven by the implementation. So today, the implementation is when they attach to the same SSID, they make the agreement that as of today, they will keep the MAC address not changing. So that will at least keep the existing services not breaking. But there is no guideline saying that tomorrow when they upgrade to another OS and due to any security reason, and we fully anticipate that they should start doing more time-based randomization. If we start seeing, but because we have the current semi or pseudo persistent MAC address per SSID, so most of the applications working today. But if let's say we have start using time-based randomization, like DHCP restoration, hospitality, using the MAC address on the airplane or in the hotel, those simple use cases will break.
Yeah, and just to spell them out, from the ones I recall were indeed hotel services registering to getting Wi-Fi throughout your stay in a hotel, or providing support, right? Connectivity support, service, customer service support based on your connection, as well as, of course, authorized access to a specific network. Many of those rely on the MAC address, and when you start having pseudo random addresses, some of these services don't work anymore. Thank you very much for that clarification. So I don't know. Probably this is a good time to move to the next part, which is the questions to the group. So there are a few questions that we would like to get answered from the community, and you have them here in front. So first is, you think that the problem statement is clear, well scoped, solvable, and useful to solve? The second question is, are people willing to participate, meaning review documents or comment on the mailing list, or of course author new documents? That's always a possibility. Of course, this is an open group. And finally, is there support to form a working group with this charter from the community? So let's move to the first question, if that's okay. First, let me ask, are people understand well these questions, or are there any clarifications on the questions? Okay. So if there are none, then you have a show of hands tool on the top right-ish of your screen. That is a little bar graph. And we would like to get your feedback there by either raising your hand or do not raising your hand. So in the question again is, does the community think that the problem statement is clear, it's well scoped, solvable, and useful to solve. So please raise your hand or not. We can wait a couple of seconds. We still see the numbers moving.
NGC, this is Eric again. This tool is kind of confusing. So I would suggest, because do not raise hand means either I have no opinion or I think the statement is false. So if you don't mind, after these questions has been asked and answered, please ask the reverse questions. Does the community think that this problem statement is unclear or non-well scope or non-solvable or not useful to solve? And then we will see a clear number. Because maybe people do not raise hand, maybe they have no opinion.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Eric. Okay, so we don't see the numbers moving, so maybe we can stop there for now. So the numbers are 23 people raising hand, 7 not raising hand, for a total of 30. So as suggested, then let's ask the question reversed. Does the community think that the problem is unclear, not well scope, unsolvable, or unuseful? If you think so, please raise your hand. Interesting. Okay, so we have, okay, the number's still moving. But we have many people not raising the hand. So we can probably close it there, Carlos. So in this case, now we have 36 people. So the numbers are similar. I guess the same 7. It's probably the answer to your question, Eric. We have 23, 29 people thinking that the problem is clear, well scoped, solvable, and useful, and some 7 people thinking otherwise. So would you like to get some discussion on that? Pascal? I see Pascal on the queue. Okay. Jerome?
Thank you. Just a quick comment on some conversation I see in the chat. I wanted to underline that in the IEEE 802 group, some documents are not visible to all. In particular, the drafts are not accessible to people outside of the working group or the task group, and that's because the document is not, ready for consumption outside of the people who have not participated in the conversations. However, all the contributions that anyone makes to the group are visible, so this could be useful for those who are interested in that aspect. But I would like to also underline that the 802.11 working group is going to only work on the 802.11 problem, which means that this is between the station and the access point. Anything beyond is out of scope, mostly, which means that, in the issues that you were raising about, for example, parental policy, parental control, when you have this 48% in the US of parents use that technique where they control if young children access the internet beyond a certain time, should be sleeping instead of watching cat videos. If MAC changes, those policies are challenged in many cases. The HCP is the same thing. The 8.11 today specifies, and again, it's very Wi-Fi. There may be some other standards that do not say that, that you cannot rotate your Mac if you already have established a communication and association to an access point to make it simple. But they don't say that you cannot disconnect every 10 seconds if you want. And of course, if you do that, you may be changing your Mac every 10 seconds, which is likely to pose some challenges into some DHCP scope dimensioning. So, all these kind of problems are likely to be completely beyond the scope of the 8.11 task group, because, that's a service which is beyond the access point. So, I see that, there are some complementary work that happens between the SDOs, but also see that there are some overlaps that do not exist. The IEEE 8.11 working group is not going to look at those services beyond there, but those services are things that we here at the IETF are very well versed into, and we can look into those to understand if they are affected or not. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that clarification, Jérôme. That's true. It's very useful to remind people about the scope of the groups. So maybe we can move to the next question, which is who's willing to review documents or to participate in this working group actively, either, as I said, reviewing or why not writing drafts, and of course commenting on the mailing lists. So if you are interested in this topic and willing to review, contribute, or participate by submitting documents or comments on the mailing list, please raise your hand. If you are not interested, please do not raise your hand. So moving, numbers are still moving, and again, you can click on the show of hands tool on the top right of your screen to participate in this question. Okay. So numbers are pretty stable, so we can close it there. And again, we have about 30 people answering, and the numbers are fairly similar. So 23 raising hand and 7 not raising hand. I don't think that we need the reverse answer in this. The reverse question in this case, unless someone thinks otherwise.
I agree with you. This is Eric. No need to ask.
Thanks, Eric. So in that case, maybe we can go to the next question.
For that, maybe we can just rephrase the question that if there is support, raise hand, and if there is not, do not raise hand, to make it maybe clear, like something like this. But I can change the question if you prefer to ask 2 questions.
For me, would be fine. I don't know, Eric, do you have a preference?
The only thing is people already started to vote, right? So you cannot change the text.
Right. So
I mean, that's fine for me.
And we have Dave on the queue while we're starting to receive answers.
I just want you to clarify when it says the following charter, is that referring to what was on the slide where we had feedback of potential amendments to that? In other words, is this as it was shown on the slide? Is that what following means?
No, that I think should not be the following. It's is the eventual charter that should be agreed by the working group on the mailing list, at least. Okay, so the following charter does not necessarily mean exactly what was on there. It means
that with potential amendments, right? Because this will affect my vote. So I just want to be clear what the question is.
My understanding is that there are comments, and we still are going to do amendments to the charter. So unless people think otherwise, it will be an amendment charter.
And we all know that the charter will be modified before creating the working group, right? There's a complete process where the IETF community is involved there. So, and rest assured, Dave and others, that the charter will fit the community and not be the exact one. I mean, except if there's a miracle that everyone agrees on this one, but I have doubts. It's pretty good draft, but it's not complete.
Sure. So with that assumption, we're going to give people a couple of seconds. So support to form a working group with a charter, with an agreed charter. Please raise your hand if you support forming a working group with an amendment charter, or do not raise your hand if you are against forming a working group. Okay, so well, the numbers are still moving a bit. Thank you very much. Again, similar number of participants. In this case, 30 people raising hand and 4 people not raising hand. So I guess that gives us interesting feedback for the next steps. Eric, I don't know if you would like to ask some other questions, or you think there's some other feedback that you would require from the IESG or yourself point of view?
No, I simply wanted to say that the last questions appears to be clear to me, but again, it's not a decision done today to create a working group, right? It will be done by the complete IETF community, but I see 30 out of 34 votes to work on this, as there is a problem, we need to work on it. While obviously about the problem statement and the charter draft, it's less clear. So the proponent and the chairs of this both will need to work more with the ISG and the community to refine the charter. That's basically my personal interpretation of those polls. So thank you for asking the questions, Carlos and Juan Carlos.
Thanks for that clarification, Eric. So indeed, I guess as next steps, we need to clean the wording on the charter, and for that we are going to kick again the discussion on the Madinas mailing list, so that we can get a crisp charter agreed by the community by rough consensus, and ideally that will be the one submitted to the IESG for consideration on creating a new working group. So with that, well, we are early, so let me ask one final time, are there any other questions or any other clarifications that people would like to have? Eric, your hand is still up.
Sorry.
No worries. Okay. So, Joey.
Well, I'm very sorry because I missed a big part of the conversation due to network problems. So please just let me know if what I'm asking is redundant. I'm basically a little bit confused. Like, I completely agree with this review of the charter and the statements and the timelines, but I'm not quite understanding how does the draft, the current draft, fit into it. Like, fundamentally, I have a concern about the part where privacy for home networks is being described as not big in requirements. Like, there is not a big requirement on privacy for home networks, given that that home networks are trusted, for example. But there's some other parts that I'm a little bit concerned about. So, does my question make sense, or should I elaborate a little bit more?
No, I think it's a fair question, and you didn't miss that part because we did not discuss the content of the drafts in detail. The purpose of the BOF was to identify whether there were issues that we wanted to work on, and if that work would be useful for the community. So the content of the draft will be definitely up for discussion and complete review once we have a working group. That draft it's an individual draft at this moment, and it hasn't been adopted by any working group at all. So all that specific content on the draft is up for discussion, and the details you mentioned would be addressed at a later point. You have something else to?
Yeah, I just want to
No.
follow up what the previous question. So when we say here the draft, when we wrote the draft, we are standing from the user point of view to say when the user feel trust. It's not talking about from the technology point of view. We are not saying that, hey, you're at home, then we don't do. We are not value privacy as a very important point. We're just saying that from the user perspective, when they were home, they will feel that it's a trusted network. How to address that is beyond the scope of that draft, but at this point, we just discussed like from the user perspective, how he feel about like the home, how he feel about using the devices at home.
Thank you both. In that case, absolutely, I will reserve my reviews and comments for later. Thank you for the clarification.
Thanks, Joey, and indeed that is taken as you have interest in participating and you're willing to contribute, which is great. That's a question that we were trying to get an answer for. So indeed, those type of feedback are exactly what we would like to hear, and for that, please join the Madinas mailing list and send your comments over there. So great. So thank you very much, everyone, for participating into this BOF, and you will be hearing from us soon. Take care.
Thank you, guys. Take care.
Bye.